listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, greetings to KSER, our newest affiliate, a 5,800-watt station in Everett, Washington. Glad to have you with us. Our third hour today is going to be our Brunch with Bernie hour. Senator Bernie Sanders on the line with us. He's not going to be available for us on Friday, and today seems like the perfect day for the conversation. Senator, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, Tom.
Great to have you. I'm curious your thoughts on what happened last night.
How many hours do we have? Long, sad story. But This is what I think. I think the Republicans ran a very, very smart political campaign. I think it's going to hurt the nation very deeply, but they ran a very smart political campaign. And this is what they said. They said, how are you feeling about the economy? How are things going for you? And people say, you know what? I'm working longer hours for lower wages. My kid can't afford to go to college. I can't afford child care. And while I'm struggling, the people on top are doing phenomenally well. I'm not really feeling good about the economy. And the Republicans said, well, do you know who the President of the United States is? The guy named Barack Obama. And you should hold him accountable for everything that's going on today, despite the fact that we are much better off today than we were 6 years ago. Don't think about 6 years ago. That's not relevant at all. Just think about where we are today and are you where you want to be? And they managed to do that. And then they said, well, you know what? There's a senator out there, or a senator out there who voted with Barack Obama 97.3% of the time, and you should blame that person and get rid of him. And in the midst of all of that stuff, Republicans forgot to tell us what their ideas are for the future of this country. You might think that after the expenditure of billions of dollars, the American people will be saying, okay, let's see, the Republicans are saying this, Democrats are saying that, independents are saying that. Let me see which idea makes sense. Of course, that's not what happened. What happened was, and by the way, the Democrats were not much better in coming forward with ideas. So what you saw is an unbelievable amount of money being spent as a result of Citizens United. You saw thousands and thousands of ugly, negative TV ads that disgusted everybody, drove voter turnout down. And you saw a situation where the Republicans didn't tell us what their agenda is. And on Election Day, they did very, very well. And Democrats suffered a devastating loss. I think in the next few days, Tom, we will learn what, in fact, the agenda is for the Republican Party. And it's an agenda that I suspect will probably reflect maybe about what 15 or 20% of the American people want. Mm-hmm. And that agenda will be the following. They're going to do, quote-unquote, entitlement reform. And I hope the listeners understand that whenever they hear somebody talk about entitlement reform, that's simply a cowardly way of saying we're going to cut your Social Security and your Medicare. That's what they will do. And then what they will do is say, well, we want to balance the budget. They will forget the fact that the reason we had a huge budget deficit was because of two wars under the Bush-Cheney administration that were unpaid for, huge tax breaks, much of it for the wealthy that were not offset, and other programs that were not paid for. And they will also ignore the fact that we have reduced the deficit by more than half since the 1.4 trillion record-breaking deficit that Bush ran up. But they will say, we're going to balance the budget. And by the way, we do want to spend more on the military. And, oh, yeah, we want to give tax breaks to the wealthy and the large corporations. Now, Tom, just think for 2 seconds here. You don't have to be a PhD in economics to figure out that if you want to balance the budget, you don't want to raise more revenue, you want to spend more money on the military, and you want to give huge tax breaks to the wealthy, that the only way you're going to balance that budget is through devastating cuts in programs that middle-class and working families need. And that means food stamps, it means nutrition programs, it means education, it means health care programs, it means Medicaid, it means Medicare, and that is what their agenda will be. And that's the reality. But they managed to run a campaign with the media and other people not bothering to ask them what their agenda is. So that's kind of where we are today. And then the next question is, what does the president, what does Congress do about it? And I would hope that the president makes it very clear that, of course, politics is the art of compromise, and you've got to do that. And you don't get everything anything you want, especially after a devastating defeat like yesterday, but that the president also demands from the Republicans that the understanding that compromise is a two-way street, not a one-way street. Yesterday, in some of the more conservative states in this country, and we've seen this in last year, people overwhelmingly supported raising the minimum wage. And what the president should say, good, you want something from me? That's fine. What I want you to do is to raise the minimum wage. The president should make it very clear that every poll that's out there indicates that the American people are very concerned about unemployment and the fact that we need to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. And I think the president should say, you want something from me? That's fine. But this is what I want you to do. I want you to invest a substantial sum of money in rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, our roads, bridges, rail, water systems, wastewater plants, etc. And when you do that, we're going to create a whole lot of jobs. And you give me that, I'm prepared to see what you guys need. But it's got to be a two-way street, and the president can't simply surrender on issue after issue. So I hope that he remains strong, and I'll do everything that I can as an independent within the Democratic caucus to see that they remain strong.
One of the, I think, most interesting things that I noticed about last night's election is that every ballot issue, or virtually every ballot issue that was essentially progressive, minimum wage increases in Alaska, Illinois, Arkansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, Alaska, decriminalization of pot, the fracking bans in Texas, California, Ohio, paid sick leaves in Massachusetts, California, Connecticut, New Jersey. I've got a long list here. All of them passed overwhelmingly, even though the candidates who oppose all these things were elected.
Tom, that is a very, very perceptive point. And I think that says it all. On issue after issue, basically economic issues, and often, but not always, environmental issues, the American people are reasonably progressive. And yet what the Republicans have managed to do is to win an election in which on almost every major economic issue they are in opposition to the vast majority of the American people. Now, how do they do that? Well, for a start, maybe the most important point is working people, or significant numbers of working people, don't bother to vote.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I haven't seen the official tallies yesterday, and I know it varied significantly state by state. But what the projection was is that 60% of the American people were not going to vote, that some 75, 80% of young people and low-income workers were not going to vote. So you have an election where those people who are most impacted, the young people, are impacted by decisions made by Congress. They're not voting. So you can have an election in which, majority of the people don't vote, and billionaires contribute huge sums of money, and the Republicans do not talk about their agenda. And that's kind of what we had yesterday. And it works. And by the way, unless we get a handle on Citizens United and move to public funding of elections, I don't see any improvement in that dynamic.
Yeah. And then, meanwhile, over at the Brennan Center for Justice, Wendy Weiser is reporting they looked at voter suppression efforts, North Carolina, Kansas, Virginia, and Florida. And in each case, the margin by which the Republican won was a smaller number than the number of people who were turned away at the polls because they didn't have appropriate ID. So this is another big problem that we have.
A huge problem.
Yeah. Senator Bernie Sanders with us. It's our Brunch with Bernie hour. He will be taking your phone calls right after this break. Stick around. And, by the way, be sure to check out Bernie's website, sanders.senate.gov. You can find him on Facebook. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Sanders.senate.gov is Bernie's website, and he's also got a very active Facebook page. Just get over to Facebook and plug in Bernie Sanders or Senator Sanders. Welcome back. It's our Brunch with Bernie hour, 2 days early, and a couple hours late. And in the third hour of our Wednesday program, Senator Sanders live on the line with us, and Dave in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. You're on the air with Senator Sanders.
Hello. Thanks for taking my call. It's an honor to speak with you, Senator.
Good. Thank you, Dave.
I have a question about our voting machines. I don't understand. Nobody seems to want to talk about this after an election because it's on some level it sounds like just sort of sour grapes complaining. But I just can't believe that we're expected to accept the fact that our voting process is completely owned and controlled by corporate-owned electronic voting machines that we're not even allowed to check. How is that possible, and what can we do about it? What can you do about it?
Well, Dave, I know that Thom has written about this and has spoken a whole lot about that. I'm going to let him answer your question.
Okay. Personally, I just think it's an affront to democracy that we have privatized our vote. It's the beating heart of democracy. Of all the things in our commons that should be run by government, the vote is the most important, and it should not be in the hands of private corporations. I think we should go back to paper and stop subsidizing these corporations.
Good. And as you and I have discussed many, many times, and I know this is an issue you have studied, I absolutely agree with you. People argue, well, maybe a paper ballot is going to take too long to count and so forth and so on. But the Canadians, I think, use paper. They get their results out quickly, and I don't think there's a whole lot of debate about whether or not the results are accurate.
Yeah, and pretty much every country in Europe and all over the world. Chris in Asheville, North Carolina, listening on WPVM. You're on the air with Senator Sanders.
Hey, it's an honor to talk to you, Senator Sanders. I'm feeling kind of hopeless here in North Carolina. There wasn't much of a choice here. Kay Hagan, I really blew it. Based on what I understand about demographics here, of the Hispanic population that was a legal voting population of about 3%, and she lost it by about 1.5%, and it seemed pretty obvious that could have solved the problem, along with a lot of other things you touched on earlier, Thom, about how if we would just be progressive, that our candidates would work. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about the fact that we want you to run, and I'm really concerned that the system as it stands won't allow somebody such as yourself, somebody with real integrity, with real values, to be able to compete with the money and the machine. What are we going to do?
Well, Chris, thank you very much for your kind words. I think the first thing we have to do is recognize the severity of the problems that we face, and they're not only all of the economic problems that Thom and I and everybody else talks about, they are the political problems. And the political problems is the deck is stacked for a variety of reasons against candidates who want to represent working people in the middle class. Those candidates are not going to get the support of billionaires or the Koch brothers. And then you got a media out there which, people talk about, well, why aren't Democrats or others talking about these issues? And sometimes that's a very valid criticism. I mean, as I've said a million times on this show, I don't think the Democrats are anywhere near as progressive as they should be in terms of standing up for ordinary people and taking on big money interest. But you would be surprised that a lot of times when folks do that, it doesn't get a whole lot of media attention. And how do you deal with that one? How do we communicate? I mean, Thom Hartmann and other talk show hosts, progressives, do a great job. But Thom is outnumbered 10-1 or more, 20-1, in terms of the amount of time the progressives have on the air as opposed to right-wing folks. How do we deal with that issue? How do we more effectively use the Internet to communicate our ideas? How do we educate young people? Probably one of the saddest things about yesterday is the fact that, probably 80% of young people did not come out to vote, while they are going to be most impacted by the decisions made by a Republican Congress. How do we address that issue? So, I think, Chris, there are some huge issues out there that we got to think hard about. We've got to put them on the table, make a diagnosis. How do we go forward? On the other hand, what is very positive, and Thom and I just chatted about this, is that when you ask people their views, you go up to them and say, do you think we should raise the minimum wage? What is it, 70% think yes, Thom?
Yeah, in 5 states.
70% wins in 5 states. Do you think we should have pay equity for women workers? Overwhelmingly. Do you think we should have a jobs program, creating millions of jobs, rebuilding infrastructure? Absolutely. Do you think we should change our unfettered free trade policies, which enable corporations to go to China and lay off American workers? Oh yeah, we gotta change that. Do you think we should make higher education affordable? Tom and I have talked 40 years ago in this country. Some of the best universities, public universities, University of California, City University of New York, free, tuition free. Today, working class families can't afford it. So on all of those issues, Chris, we have the people with us. But how do you bring people together, which you can. You can do it, but we ought to be very smart about it. When they are assaulted every single day by 30-second ads, by a media which will not discuss these issues, it ain't easy. I think we can do it, but we got to be smart about it. So, Chris, thank you very much. I think you raised exactly the right questions, and we've got to figure it out.
Yeah. But we just have 45 seconds. Move to amend. I just got an email from them that in Massachusetts, Ohio, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Florida, people passed constitutional amendments or a call for them. On average, over 70% of the vote to overturn Citizens United.
And this is not a progressive issue. This is across the board. If you're a conservative, you know what? You don't want billionaires buying elections. So that's just one more issue. So here is the irony. You got a party that will take control of the United States Senate that has an agenda that maybe reflects 15 or 20% of the American people. But they're able to get away with that stuff because they don't talk about their agenda, and they run huge numbers of 30-second ads paid for by the billionaire class. And that's, the issue that Chris raises. How do we deal with that? And it ain't easy. It can be done, but we got to be really thoughtful about it.
It's our Brunch with Bernie hour, 2 days early here on Wednesday. We'll be back with more of your calls for Senator Sanders right after this. Be sure to check out Bernie's website, sanders.senate.gov. Stick around. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Senator Bernie Sanders on the line with us. It's our Brunch with Bernie hour for this week, 2 days early, and the senator is going to be traveling on Friday, won't be available, and we're live. It's the day after the elections, and Senator, you're with us?
I am right here.
Okay, Sharon in Bellingham, Washington, you're on the air with Senator Sanders.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my call. I need to be talked back from the ledge a little bit. I'm 64 and a half. And I'm going to have a fairly minimal Social Security. I'm fortunate that I've been saving since my 20s, so I have things, but it's in mutual funds and things like that. And I am afraid that Social Security and Medicare may have died yesterday. What can we do about this?
Okay.
Am I over-exaggerating?
Yes, you are. All right. Don't get off the ledge. All right. You're back in your house there. Lock the window.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Look, Social Security and Medicare are not going to disappear with the results of this election. That's not going to happen. I will not allow it to happen. Most of the people in the Democratic caucus will not allow it to happen. The president will not allow it to happen. So it ain't going to happen. What I fear will happen is attempts to cut Social Security through a so-called chain CPI, which will lower the cost of living adjustments that seniors get. And not only seniors, but disabled veterans, people on disability. They will make that effort, and many of us will vigorously oppose that effort. So just because they make the effort does not mean it's going to succeed, and I will do everything I can to make sure that the president vetoes that type of legislation. In the House, what the Republicans did is not end Medicare. They significantly transformed it in a very bad way. They wanted to. It didn't go into effect, of course, to a voucher program by which they would give people an $8,000 check in order to go out and get private insurance. And I think in the House proposal, it didn't apply to people who are on Medicare, but people who would in a few years be on Medicare. So don't think that Social Security is going to disappear tomorrow or Medicare is going to disappear tomorrow. That is not going to happen. And many of us are going to do our best to prevent any cuts to these terribly important programs. In other words, as I have said many, many times, in terms of Social Security, our goal must be to not only not cut it, but to expand it, because many seniors just can't live on the $12,000 or $13,000 a year that they're getting. All right, are you off the ledge now?
She's dropped off the call, but I that was very reassuring. David in Phoenix, Arizona, you're on the air with Senator Sanders. David?
Hello? Oh, David, yes. Senator Sanders, just as global warming has a tipping point, the point of no return, when will the point come when the oligarchy is so well established that we can't return to a democracy? I think it could happen in 2016 if we lose the presidential election. If the Democrats win the 2016 election, it'll just delay the tipping point. The only way the tipping point will disappear is when the Democrats win the presidency in both houses. What do you think, Senator Sanders? When do you think we might reach a tipping point?
Well, David, you ask I think a fair question. I think what David is saying, if you have a billionaire class that has literally unlimited sums of money to spend on elections, if you have a billionaire class that significantly owns much of the media, is it possible that the day will come that no matter what the needs of working people are, what the desires of working people are, that they will never be able to make the kinds of changes that are needed to improve their lives, that the billionaire class, if you like, the establishment, will be so entrenched that they just cannot be removed from power. And that is not a crazy thought, and that's a reasonable, I think, analysis. I mean, we went through a period where 6 years ago, the people on Wall Street engaged in highly illegal behavior, and their penalty for destroying the lives of millions of people and sinking the United States economy into the worst recession since the Great Depression, their penalty was that they got bailed out, and that a few years later they were making more money than they ever did before. And they had to pay some fines, but none of them went to jail. So I think, they did it. They committed huge crimes, and nothing really happened to them. And yet at the same time, I think David's point is that you got a whole lot of working people, a majority of working people in this country who are working longer hours for lower wages, deeply worried about the lives of their kids, can't afford child care for their babies, worried about their retirements, and does anyone stay up nights worrying about them? And what can they do about it? Can they take on the billionaire class? Well, David, a very legitimate question. David, I honestly don't know the answer. I think about that all the time.
Craig in St. Petersburg, Florida. You're on the air with Senator Sanders.
Yeah, how you doing there, Senator Sanders?
Good.
Sanders, and also Tom. I tell you what, I'm very upset. I'm a registered independent, but I'm a progressive like yourself, and I'm tired of the DNC constantly defending themselves against their own platform when they ought to be taking a more aggressive and progressive stance and put the Republicans on their heels. We never get our point across to the majority of people that we are the ones that are behind them. The Republicans they just beat the same drum, and we're constantly on the defense. And so I guess I'd like to know, when are we going to get somebody in charge of the DNC that actually takes a more progressive route?
Well, Craig, I think you make a good point, but it's not just the DNC. The people who are head of the DNC work for the Democratic Party and work for the elected officials and so forth and so on. So I wouldn't just say it's an issue of the DNC. I think what you're really asking is, when are the Democrats, if ever, going to make it clear that they stand for the needs of working families, and when are they going to define those issues, and when are they going to come up with proposals to address the problems they've defined, and when are they going to take on the big money interests who are the cause of so many of our problems? And the answer is, I don't know. I, like you, am an independent who caucuses with the Democrats. No question in my mind that the Democratic Party is far superior to the Republican Party. But there's also no question in my mind that there are a whole lot of Democrats who are not prepared to stand up to the moneyed interests because they need those moneyed interests to get campaign contributions, just like the Republicans do. But I think, Craig, that what we have got to do is articulate a very clear agenda that, in fact, if implemented, would reverse the decline of the middle class, and it would create millions of jobs and raise wages. So let me just tick off just a few of the things that I think we have to do. Number one, maybe most importantly, real unemployment today is close to 12%, youth unemployment 20%. We need a massive federal jobs program to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. If you spent $1 trillion, which is one-third of what we spent in the war in Iraq, a war we never should have gotten into, $1 trillion would create 13 million jobs and make this country much more productive. I think we should do that. I think we should raise the minimum wage to at least $10 an hour. I would go further than that. That would be a pay raise for 25 million Americans. American people strongly support that. I think we should go forward with pay equity. Women deserve equal pay for equal work. I think we need to change our trade policies so the companies are not given a green light to go to China or other low-wage countries and throw American workers out on the street. I think we need to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to address the planetary crisis of global warming. And maybe most importantly, I think we need a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United and move to public funding of elections. You do those things, you have transformed the American society. You've created jobs, make college affordable, make sure that our kids, regardless of income, get a decent education. You fight for that agenda. You demand that the wealthy and the powerful start paying their fair share of taxes. You demand that they don't shut down in this country their companies and move to China. You know what? A lot of people are going to say, right on, let's do it, let's go together. So I think that's what we need. We need that agenda. We need to rally the American people around that kind of agenda.
Yeah. We just have 50 seconds. It was Ross Perot, a billionaire, who was championing that, many years ago. Where are the voices now?
Well, again, it's Ross Perot was, I thought, very effective in talking about the trade issue in NAFTA.
Yeah.
But Ross Perot also was a billionaire who was, and it's funny. I remember like it was yesterday. Remember, he used to do these half-hour advertisements, and he used to have a chart and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And people laughed at him. Nothing to laugh about. I give the guy credit. He was trying to educate the American people in a way other than a 30-second ad. And what he said then turned out to be right. These trade agreements are a disaster for the American working class of this country, and they've resulted in the loss of a whole lot of factories and decent-paying jobs.
Senator Bernie Sanders with us. It's our Brunch with Bernie hour, 2 days early here on the Thom Hartmann program. We'll be back with more of your questions for the Senator right after this. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and it is our Brunch with Bernie hour, 2 days early. Senator Sanders with us on this Wednesday after Election Day. On Friday, he's going to be traveling, so we'll just do Anything Goes Friday. Brandon in Madison, Wisconsin, listening on 92.1 FM. You are on the air with Senator Sanders.
Hello, Senator and Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I am extremely frustrated after yesterday, obviously. And I've often wondered if in order to get to a better place, we might just have to let everything loose. Maybe we should allow them to carry out their agenda in full and let people feel it. Let it hit home. Let it hit hard. As you were saying earlier, the messaging is just not getting through to young people. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Well, thanks, Brendan. And there are a lot of people who would agree with you. I don't, and I'll tell you why. Number one, obviously, it's as a United States Senator, I'm not going to participate or allow things to happen that I can stop, which would make life more difficult for people who are already struggling. That's number one. Number two, I am just not of the theory that when people are really desperate, so if you allow policies to go forward, which would lower incomes for working families, increase poverty, increase hunger in America, increase homelessness in America, that somehow people will say, okay, enough is enough. These guys have caused these problems, and we're going to take them on. I just don't think it works like that. I think when people are beaten up and made really desperate, sometimes their anger is going to come out in unexpected ways and not necessarily against the people who caused those problems. So I do understand your frustration, and we're going to have to figure out a way to fight our way through this. And I believe that we can. We're going to have to be awfully smart because we're up against a lot of money and a lot of smart people. Again, I would argue that what Republicans did yesterday was nothing less than brilliant. They managed to hide what their agenda is. They managed to blame the president for things that he is not culpable for and pull it off and managed to keep the voter turnout very low so that a lot of folks who should be voting did not vote. And we got to figure out how we reverse that. Not easy task, but we can do it.
Grant in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You're on the air with Senator Sanders.
Hey, Mr. Sanders, I wish you'd run for president, too, but the Republicans wouldn't let you do anything either. I'd like to say that up front. I've got an issue with my own personal senator, Tom Coburn, and he made a claim to the media that there was somebody who was a veteran, and I'm a veteran, and 40% disabled, and I'm getting $1,358 a month and have since 1993. And it's going to change at age 59 to $1,538. I paid for that almost with my life to get it. And Tom Coburn claimed that there was a veteran who was triple dipping and making $229,000 a year off of the government from Social Security, officers' pay, and I was an officer also. I retired as an 02 out of the 45th out of Oklahoma. And making a long story short, he said that he was making $229,000 a year, and I don't believe him.
Grant, thanks very much. Number one, thank you very much for your service. Look, it's no secret that your senator, who is retiring now, really is not a great fan of government programs. And I don't want to speak for him, but I think if he had his way, he would certainly make devastating cuts to programs that millions and millions of people depend upon to live with a shred of dignity. He is one of the more conservative members of the Republican Party, and nothing that he says really surprises me because I've heard it for years.
Al in St. Louis, Missouri. We have 2 minutes to the end of the show. Quick question for Bernie, Al?
Yes, Bernie, or Senator Sanders, I'm sorry. Where do we go from here when the problem with the depth and breadth of the misinformation and the propaganda campaign that we're facing, this barrage of money and propaganda, to the point where I sat next to a gentleman, an older gentleman this morning at breakfast, and he was talking about we need to release all those trillions of dollars of foreign profits come back in so that we can get our roads and bridges built. That's their latest propaganda campaign. Bring that money back. We'll put it to work for the country.
Bring it back tax-free. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mentioned to them, well, the last time they had this tax amnesty from all these foreign profits, they basically just did stock options and dividends.
Let's let Bernie respond, Al.
Well, I think Al got it exactly right. That is exactly what they did. So what the Republicans will do is come up with the goal there is to allow corporations to bring their money back from tax havens and not pay any or very, very little taxes on it. That's what the goal is, and they'll spruce it up by saying, I'm going to use it for this, that, and the other thing. But Al is exactly right. We saw that movie in the past, and it certainly did not do what they said it would do.
Senator, about 45 seconds, final thoughts?
All right, I think the final thought is that a lot of people are hurting today from what happened yesterday, and our job is to think it through. These are incredibly difficult times in terms of the struggle that people are going through economically. They are incredibly difficult times politically in the sense of big money dominating what happens in this country. Is there a solution? There is. And we're just going to have to be smart. We're going to have to think it through. We're going to have to figure out ways to educate and organize. And we have no choice but to go forward and do that.
Senator, thank you so much for the inspiration and for the visit.
Okay, Tom.
Thank you very much. We will be back tomorrow. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires your participation. It still does. Even with a crummy election like, well, there was some actually good news in this election. But, you know, it still requires your action. So get out there, get active, tag. You're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, go to thomhartmann.com.